Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we give you our thanks and praise that you have called us into the worldwide family of your church. We give particular thanks for our partnership in the gospel with the Diocese of Viborg. And we pray that together we would learn more of what it is to follow Christ in this COVID era. For his name's sake, Amen. Peter.
Thank you very much, Bishop Andrew. And on behalf of Viborg Diocese, I would like to thank you for taking this initiative and inviting us to this joint webinar. As Bishop Andrew said, my name is Peter, and I'm a parish pastor and also diocese pastor. I'm also engaged in the ongoing contact between Viborg Diocese and our friendship dioceses, including Guildford. And this afternoon, I will have the privilege of guiding us through this webinar. The focus of the webinar is how we have experienced what it means to be church during a crisis, where the church doors have been closed, and where the state has imposed restrictions and limitations to the church. What challenges has this situation presented, and what lessons do we take from it? I think when we began talking about this webinar more than 6 months ago, I think we felt quite sure that we would be on the other side of the pandemic by now. I guess we thought this could be an opportunity to look back and see what we had learned. We can still do that, but the reality is also that we are still very much in the midst of an unfamiliar and strange situation where the pandemic continues to challenge us both as society and as church, and also as individual. Therefore, this webinar will not only be a retrospective exercise, I hope it also will challenge and inspire us in a more direct sense to reflect on our actions and choices of today and tomorrow. Before we continue, just a few practical information and requests. Please, all of you, mute your microphones during the webinar so we won't have any noise on the line. The presenter should, of course, turn on both microphone and camera when speaking. If you should have a question or comments, and I hope you will have, please write the question or the comment in the chat in the right side of your screen. Then I'll make sure that after each presentation, all questions and comments will be asked and mentioned. Unfortunately, we won't have time for oral questions, only the written questions and comments. Yes, and this afternoon we have 4 presentations, 4 presenters. First, Bishop Henrik from Viborg Diocese will give a Danish perspective on the situation. Then Bishop Andrew will speak from a Guildford context. And after the 2 bishops' presentations, we will listen to 2 parish priests. First, Pastor Christine from Viborg Diocese, and afterwards, Pastor Andreas from Guildford. And as I said, after each presentation, I will make sure that questions written in the chat will be asked and hopefully also answered. And we should reach the end of this official part of the webinar within an hour or so. And then Bishop Henrik will have a concluding closing remark. And then afterwards, we'll let the meeting room stay open another half an hour or so to give space and time for more informal conversation and chat. With these introductory remarks, I will now give the floor to our first presenter, and that is Bishop Henrik. Please.
Thanks a lot, Peter. I'm really delighted to have this opportunity also to share some of our thoughts concerning this virus that affected all of us. Just to give you an update from today, I can say the last 24 hours, we have had about 1,000 new people affected here in Denmark. Overall in Denmark, we have around 700 people who has died with this COVID-19 in Denmark. And right now, the biggest problem is that there has been this virus has also gone to mink farms here in the northern part of Jutland. And the virus has mutated into a new form, so that the new vaccines that we are working on won't affect this new form of the virus. So therefore, it's quite scaring for all of us. And the government took a resolute decision to kill all mink in Denmark. And it means that more than 17 million minks are now being killed all over and put in mass graves. And of course, it means that thousands of people, they lost their jobs. And many of those farms has been driven by families, and they have been working on that for generations. One of those municipalities that has been closed, the government took the decision to kill all the minks, and then they closed down 7 municipalities. One of them are in our diocese. And it means that pastors and workers, they can't pass the border to another municipality. They have to stay at home. The churches are still open because I think the society expect us as churches to be a kind of, a place for rest, and also a place for where people can come, also talk to pastors and so on. But you can imagine it is quite rough for us these days, and it's coming very near to our diocese. And then how to address this? We have just received a very huge report from our Institute of Education and Research in our church, a huge report, and it was presented for us bishops a few days ago. So I would just take some of the main points from that report and share them here with you. So the first findings was that they have asked, I think they have interviewed more than 4,000 people to see how do they reflect on this virus and the position of the church. And the first result was that 53% of the population find that the church should be an active player in society under a pandemic like this. So more than half expect the church to be active. And I think it's a quite good signal to send also to our government. And I can come back to that later. The second finding was that people actually also expect a reaction from the church on a national level. And compared to the Danish situation or reality, it's quite new, because we have been very proud of having a church coming up bottom up, and nearly all of the decisions will be taken on the local level, and all the economy is also at the local level. And as bishops, we can't we can't take a decision on behalf of the church. But people expect also that the church should react nationally. Then they have asked people, because in such a crisis, normally many people will increase, the population will increase in the faith of God. But they couldn't find any increase in faith of God during this pandemic. And there's no measurable increase in religious practice. There was it raised a question how to react on a national level. I don't know if you have heard it in Guildford, but we got the opportunity here in Viborg to make a service on the national television channel, and they put it on the main channel. Normally they put services in a secondary channel, but now they moved in, and there was more than 200,000 who went for that service. And it was a service specific planned for the people sitting at home. There was no one in the church. It was an empty church with just the pastor. And we have now started a dialogue with the Danish national broadcast company, because we want to make such one at Christmas as well. And they have also decided now to put every Sunday they'll put a service on the main channel up till Christmas. So it has been a result of this dialogue with the broadcasting company. If you look at baptism and funeral and confirmation, I will see here if I can share my no, I can't find out. So I'll just drop it. I would have shared with you just a figure on the funerals, and we can see that we have had almost the same amount of funeral this year than we had last year, in the period from the 11th of March, when the government closed down the church, and up till the end of August. Almost the same. But baptism, we saw a drastic decrease in baptism, because of course people couldn't come to the church, and only very few are allowed to come for services. So it was a decrease from 27,000 to 21,000. So what will we do as churches now to see if we can get them in again later on? We'll have to look at it. Maybe you have an idea from Guildford. What could we do to catch up with that? And also on confirmation, you know, in Denmark, in our diocese, I think it's about 95% of the youth who will get who will come for confirmation in the church. But this time there was a decrease from 45,000 until 16,000. A huge decrease. Maybe some of them came in September, I think so. But hopefully it won't be the rule in the future. And then I can say, I think many pastors, they were very creative during this pandemic, and they started to send online services. And on Easter Day, there was this national service that was brought on the main channel, and there was also about 230 other churches who sent their own online service for the congregation. I think there was a very steep learning curve among pastors on how to do that with the online services. It's funny to see, but after we opened the churches again, they nearly almost closed down again. How come that some of them won't continue? It's also a question for us, I think, in the future. If you look at it from a theological way, then you can say that main themes in the sermons during this period has been loss of power and security. There's been a lot about death and loss, a lot about hope and reconciliation. It has been, most of the sermons has been about God as the mercy God that gives comfort, hope, and courage. At the same time, the public agenda has been about prohibition, responsibility, and injunction. we can see the online services, they have almost kept to the normal liturgy, but they made it shorter. And they shorted some of the hymns, and they shorted also the creed. The creed is nearly missing in those services. How come that? Organizational, we have had a lot of challenges, communication challenges, from bishop to the congregations and to the local congregation councils. And another challenge is the relationship between state and church. You know, we call it a folk church, but we have a minister and also a ministry for church affairs, and we are closely connected. And when the government decided to close society, they also took the decision to close down all churches. And they even ordered us to lock all doors to churches. It's the first time that had happened. And I was called the same evening, a journalist called me and said, what will the church do now? What is the response from the church? And at that time, we really fear this virus, and we could see that a lot of people was hospitalized, and everyone was in shock, actually. And of course, we said that the church should follow and also stay with the society, and therefore we should close down. But it was the first time it was a government decision. I said that evening in the interview that it's not the time to discuss church-state relation. We can keep it for later. But right now we have just had a meeting among bishops a few days ago, and there we took the decision that we won't allow it again to come like that. Next time we would be the one to take the decision. If not, then we'll be a state church. And we are not a state church, we are a folk church. That's why, and we have made such an action plan also, if it should happen again, that we should close down. And in that plan, it says that the churches should stay open so that people can come, light a candle, make a prayer, just have a moment silent in the church, and then go again. And then services, of course, maybe we'll have to put the numbers down. But I think it would be my first remarks here. And I'm really looking forward also to hear from your perspective, Andrew, in Guildford. We have seen the latest numbers also from England, and it is quite scaring.
Thank you very much, Bishop Henrik, for your presentation. We have a few questions in the chat. I think I'll just mention all of them, and perhaps you can give a short overall reply afterwards. First, Martin Booth asks, you mentioned this survey that shows no increase in faith in Denmark, but does it show a decrease? That's the first question.
It's on the same level.
Same level, okay.
Yeah, they couldn't see a change.
Then another question from David Welsh. How do we carry hope for our congregations and people when we ourselves don't feel hopeful? And maybe I can just say the last question as well. Is church the building or the people? Do you feel we can be an effective church, but in people's homes? After all, the church started in homes. Yeah.
When I mentioned the church was closed down, it was the building. Of course, the pastors were still there. We tried still to teach the people coming from confirmation, and we little by little we opened again. So now the churches, they are open, but restricted numbers. We had the discussion on also moving to people's home. I agree that, of course, it started as a church going on in private homes. We have had this discussion about baptism. should we allow now that baptism could be moved from the church to the private homes? For me, I find it difficult, because I think also baptism is also the time when you get your membership in the church, you get part of the congregation. And that's why we would like to keep it in the church, so that we can come and we can say congratulations to you, because now you are part of our congregation. But it's a huge discussion, and I'm sure that we will be forced also to accept more of those baptism back at home. And how to keep up hope? Of course, that's a huge question. But for me, I think, for me personally, the gospel is actually so full with hope that I think we will have just to keep to the gospel. If you do that, I think it will fill us with hope. And we need to be there. And there need to be a voice of hope in society right now. And that's why we can't accept that the churches should be closed down once again. Because normally during such a crisis, people will come to the church. We have seen that before, also here. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Henrik. I think we will have to move to our next presenter. That's your colleague in Guildford Diocese, Bishop Andrew. There are a few more questions in the chat, but I think we will not have time for those now. One question is how long time the churches have been closed in Denmark. I think that was 2.5 months, wasn't it? Yeah, about that. So we will move to our next presenter, Bishop Andrew in Guildford. You will also share some perspectives on the corona situation seen from your context. What challenges has this situation presented to you as church and diocese? And what lessons have you learned so far? Bishop Andrew, please.
Thank you, Peter, very much, and really good to hear from Viborg. Our situation here, I mean, we have many times the number of deaths that you have in Denmark. We have a population that's 12 or 13 times bigger than yours, but a death rate which is, I think, about 40 or 50 times bigger than yours. So we're in the mid 40,000s have died of COVID. It's a very large number of people indeed. And partly because of that, we're now in the middle of a second national lockdown. We had our first lockdown where things were closed. We're now in another 28 days of lockdown because the virus has been again on the rise. So people are working from home. The vulnerable are expected to self-isolate. All leisure facilities are closed. Travel is restricted. And churches have been told to close for congregational worship. We can still have the church is open for individual prayer, but not for congregational worship. In the first lockdown back in March, I think most people accepted that although this had never happened before in England, that it was right that we closed the churches, that the situation was so out of hand, becoming so serious. There was a sense that the bishops were being too strict on it in some quarters. And particularly, I think we made a mistake in saying that clergy shouldn't be able to pray in their own churches, that actually we should lock the doors to clergy as well as to congregations. But at that time, we had little idea of how COVID was transmitted. And I think we felt that it was better to be over strict than over lax, but I know that caused some upset and I understand that. Most of our churches very quickly developed online worship, and I was amazed and impressed by how quickly that happened. Even the first Sunday of lockdown, churches that had never done anything like it before were finding ways to go online. And some of those were recorded services and some of those were live streamed. And it took a while for some other churches to catch up, but that proved a really interesting new way of communicating the faith in a way that most of us hadn't done before. And we found, particularly in those early days, that a very large number of people were tuning in to those online services, many more than would normally come on a Sunday. So it seemed to be opening up access to people who wouldn't normally come and giving them a chance to look into church life, to taste it, if you like, without having to come through the church doors and all the fear that some people would have doing that. In the second lockdown, we're also obeying government regulations, but there has been more of a sense of challenge here, which I picked up very strongly in Bishop Henrik's contribution. We're really saying to government, we don't want this to happen again. And particularly not because we had developed in between the lockdowns, we developed some very safe practices in our churches. Obviously, everyone wearing face masks and socially distanced, and we haven't been allowed to have congregational singing. And we feel that when this second lockdown is over, we're really pushing the government quite hard not to close churches again. On the other hand, the story of the Exodus, used and understood properly, and the story of the Babylonian exile have been very strong messages for Christian people over these times, that there has been a sense in which we are in uncharted territory. We're separated from our buildings, we're separated from the sacrament of the Eucharist, we're separated from the normal warmth and, of Christian fellowship. We can't sing hymns together out loud. We have to hum them behind our face masks. And there is that kind of sense of exile. And along with that, of course, dealing with many people who are bereaved, including some of the clergy, many people suffering from mental illness or having mental illness in their families, and some real uncertainties, of course, about the future. And yes, we have heard about your Danish mink farms, and that is another serious concern, obviously worldwide. I was not going to mention mink farms on the condition that you didn't mention Brexit, but anyway, we've now brought both into the open. There has been a faith task group which is working at senior level with the government, and that's beginning to make some impact, which is very good. And our Church of England representative on that is the Bishop of London, Sarah Mullally. She's the most senior woman clergy person in the Church of England at the moment. And she was also formerly the government chief nurse before she was ordained. So she has a lot of respect in the nursing and medical community as well as in the church community. And she's been a great blessing to us, to the Church of England at this time. But there have been some real blessings, opportunities to do things differently, to think about things differently. Certainly online worship is a really good example of that. We've been asking questions like, what does it mean to be church at home? Really important question. What about being the international church? We wouldn't be having this seminar if it wasn't for COVID. It's just opened our imagination to the fact we can talk to people across the world. My wife, who's on this call, I see, Beverly, has her own parish and a congregation of maybe 80 or so on a Sunday, usually. When they first went online, 27 people from 27 different nations joined the service. And that's a really interesting thing from a fairly small, not a big church, but actually reaching out to 27 different nationalities. And certainly when we had our diocesan Pentecost celebration, it was wonderful to have a contribution from Bishop Henrik and from a bishop in Pakistan and from a gospel choir in Nairobi, which was conducted by our daughter, who is doing that from Zoom in our sitting room. She's normally in Nairobi. She's back in Nairobi now, but conducting a gospel choir from the cathedral, Anglican Cathedral in Nairobi. So that sense of church in the home, what does that mean? The global church, what does it mean to worship together, to have much bigger perspective of the global church? What are the new ways that we can relate to our communities during this time? Our local parish has done a wonderful thing where I live. they have a food program for families who are particularly struggling at this time. And they've got a little partnership together, and they've delivered 60,000 meals over lockdown to challenged families in more challenged parts of the diocese. So a really good example of the church just leading partnerships of this kind. Just two things to mention, I'll finish very soon. The Archbishop of Canterbury led a service which was again broadcast on our main TV channel, and he did so celebrating Eucharist from his kitchen table. That made a big impact, actually celebrating Eucharist from your kitchen table. Again, the church and the home. And just going back to our Pentecost celebration and drawing in people from different nations, including Bishop Henrik, the church, the global church, the micro and the macro. And of course, there are some real challenges ahead. We face financial challenges. We're much more dependent on the gifts of congregation members in the Church of England than you are in Denmark. We don't have church tax, and that has big implications for us. We're asking big questions about what does the post-corona church look like, and what does post-corona society look like, and what's the relationship between the two. And I guess the question that has come to me time and again is one that the prophet Isaiah raises, where the Lord says through Isaiah, "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it?" And the question has been, Lord, what is the new thing we're doing? How can we perceive it and join in with the mission of God in this generation and this time? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bishop Andrew. There are a few questions in the chat. Bishop Henrik asks a few questions to this these online services. He asks if you can say that you actually have a new online congregation, and how do you serve such a new congregation? And he also asks about Eucharisty. Do you celebrate that at online services, and are there any particular rules and guidelines for that? Maybe you can answer that.
Yes, it would be really interesting to hear Andreas on that first point as well. I mean, I think we are recognizing that there are people who are joining churches online. Sometimes they're family members or friends or grandmothers or, from other parts of the world. And I suppose the question is, how do we develop that further? And I'll be really interested to hear ideas of that as we move on. The Eucharist is tricky. We haven't gone down the line of individual members of congregations bringing their own bread and wine to an online service and the priest blessing it and then receiving it. We don't do that, but there is quite a strong conversation among the bishops at the moment about whether we need to be being more flexible about the Eucharist. Particularly with regard to individual cups, which we've not ever had in the Church of England before. There's quite a lot of debate about that, and indeed about receiving through online, in a sort of online way. So at the moment, where churches have been broadcasting Eucharist services, it has been the priest in their home or now in their church, broadcasting those, receiving the communion on behalf of the congregation. That's quite tricky from the Reformed part of the Catholic and Reformed Church of England, which sort of tries to hold them together. It's not something that is really part of our theology, but it's just trying to work out, how we celebrate the sacraments, whether we can celebrate sacramentally. And some have said we can't. During lockdown, they had a sacramental fast, and actually said that just is part of in which priests took part as well. So there have been slightly mixed practices, and there's lots of debate going on around that.
Thank you. One last question. I don't know if you can give a short answer to a big question, but the question from Paul Middleton is, do you see this as a time of preparation for the future, and how can we deepen our faith?
Thank you. I think that's a really good question. I think there's much that we are learning during this time, which we will need to keep hold of. I mean, when a new priest is ordained in the Church of England, or a new deacon or a new bishop, there's a form of words that says that we hold to the historic faith, which faith the Church is called to proclaim afresh in each generation. And it's only this crisis that's made us realize we shouldn't have taken the crisis, but actually part of proclaiming the faith afresh in a digital generation is to use digital means to do that. And many of us have had to learn very fast what it means to do that. I think we can't go back on that. It's not that every church long term will be beaming up services, I'm sure, when we can all get back as congregations, but we will need to have much more a mixed economy between online worship and corporate worship together. I think as well with Christian basics courses, we have the Alpha course here or the Emmaus course, different Christian basics courses. For some people, they found it easier to do that from their home in their Zoom setting than they would do in church. And those churches that have started Christian basics catechesis classes have actually found that's been very effective. And people have come who wouldn't have come normally. So certainly lessons. And as far as discipleship is concerned, I just hope, because everything's been thrown up in the air, you know, there's a need for greater humility, I think. We realize in the Church of England, we can sometimes quite wrongly think of ourselves rather too importantly. And actually, you know, everything's been thrown in the air. And we've had to depend on God more. And again, I think it's really important we don't lose the lessons of the Exodus, you know, of actually when you are in the desert, you know, you become dependent on God in a quite different way. Moses has quite a lot to say about that in his sermons in Deuteronomy. You know, when you get to the promised land, you're going to forget about God. So, you know, he's going to have to pull you back into the desert from time to time. And I think those are good lessons to learn.
Thank you very much, Bishop Andrew. Now we have heard two bishops talking about the present situation from a diocesan and a national level. And now we'll move to a more local level, the parish level. And we have asked two parish priests to share their reflections on the current situation. And first, I will give the floor to Pastor Christine from Viborg Diocese. Please.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes, thank you for having me. What I'm about to say, of course, reflects the Paris Army and the congregation there, and the thoughts that has come up for us there. And I think there are important lessons to learn from what we've been through during this crisis, and we've certainly found some shortcomings also, and also found out what we actually could do. First of all, I'm still not quite over the fact that the churches here in Denmark closed their doors just like that from one day to another in the middle of March, and didn't reopen until the end of May. And there were a few exceptions when it came to funerals with limited number of participants and small private celebrations like baptism with only a handful of people, or private services where only the vicar and a single parishioner participated. That was all we were allowed to do. But all in all, that the churches closed from one day to another. The door was locked. that's actually, yeah, it was physically locked, and you couldn't enter the room to sit on your own and pray. And that it could come to that I think was a shock for most of the people in the churches, certainly for me and the people in my parish and in my church. I never considered that that could happen. A Sunday with no service. I never thought that could happen. So I think at the beginning we were kind of shell-shocked around in the local churches in Denmark and paralyzed, actually. So we were very unprepared for what happened. And I think that one thing we learned is that it is important that we are prepared to act from day one next time something like this would happen. And it very well might. In the beginning of the lockdown, we spent, that's the vicars in my church and the deacon here, we spent a lot of time keeping in touch with members of the congregation. We have many elderly people and many people with poor health, physically and mentally, that live in our parish. And they are people who are very vulnerable and nervous about contracting COVID. So they were all staying in their homes and left to themselves. And we didn't want them to feel lonely and worried, so we started calling them on the phone. And we had our first lesson there. We need to have much more extended phone records with numbers. We're starting that now. And we also let them know that we were there if they needed anything. And we were ready to go shopping for them and help them in any way we could, so they didn't have to expose themselves. And then we started slowly by going for walks with them, 2 and 2, the vicar or the deacon and the parisher, those of them that had the strength for it, because then we had the opportunity to actually meet and talk. And we found out that it was a good idea for us just to walk around in the area, in the local area, and take time to talk to people who recognized us and stopped us on our way. And that was actually quite a few, because we have a lot of people sitting at home alone. So they went out to see who they could meet, and they met us. So we walked and we walked and we walked. And I think what we learned was that we were reminded that it is the personal relationship that carries people's relationship to the local church. It was so important that we as vicars were visible as a part of the local community. That way the church kept being present, though the building was locked. And when people met us, they met their church. And to me, that was also a reminder of the importance of me having my place of residency in the parish. That's something we discuss a lot in Denmark. Is that necessary or not? And I think on this occasion, it was actually vital. Another important insight was that we gained in our church was that it really is all about relationships in local community. People missed the community in our local congregation. They missed the gatherings during the week for conversations and meals and singing together, as well, of course, as Sunday service. Or more precisely, they missed Sunday service in our local church with the rest of the congregation and the vicar they knew. So it wasn't so much a Sunday service they missed, because they could watch a ton of services on TV and on Facebook and hear it on the radio. And they did all that. And we also posted small services and greetings on our Facebook page to the local congregation to keep in contact also, especially with the younger groups in our church. But what people missed was the services in our church, and they missed the community there. And it was really hard not to be able to give them that, because for many, that's the only community they have. So from the moment we were allowed to reopen the church again, we provided that was provided that we complied with restrictions, of course, and they're a bit harsh, but we've found our way around them. We made each other the promise that we would only look for possibilities from now on. We have only cancelled very few activities since we opened the church. All activities are up and running, but a lot of what we're doing are things we're doing in a different way than we used to do. So it's not like it used to be, but it's all there, all the opportunities to meet. And the members of the congregation are quite okay with that, as long as they can still come together. We try very hard to inform everyone about what we exactly do, how we go about the activities, what measures we take to live up to restrictions, so everyone can feel safe joining us. And the whole point is that it has to be safe to go to church for those who are vulnerable. And just as important, it has to feel safe for them to go, because they really need to be there. So we have definitely learned from this that right from the start, we have to be creative as much as we can to create ways for people to be able to keep meeting in our church. We've also become very aware of our responsibility to the local community here. It's going to be a very long winter with very little to do for families other than staying home. Many things are closed down. We cannot travel, and the church is the only place that has resources in the local community, local area. So we plan activities for parents and children outside this church during Christmas, so they can, and before that, so they can come whenever they like and do something together in the outside. So finally, some things we have had to change in the church the past few months has actually turned out to make people very happy. We've been forced to keep or to hold more services because of the restrictions. So there's not just one service in the Sunday, but more usually. And that's because of the fewer number of participants. We can't provide room for everyone in one service. And that means that families celebrating baptism find the services very intimate and present now. They're very grateful. They feel that they've been seen and embraced, and they actually speak that out very clearly. It's very touching, and they really feel we're there for them. So there are definitely things that we will want to bring with us from that somehow. In terms of being prepared for an event like this next time it might occur, I think we'll be far more ready to find solutions so we can keep our local community and the church alive. And when it comes to Sunday services, the churches in Viborg has joined forces on a project to install equipment for streaming services around in our churches. So the members of the congregation can attend service in their own church from home. So that'll at least be, the quality will be better and be more like being at the service. And we'll also be able to use that during normal times when people in families have members who can't attend because they're sick or can't get out. We'll be able to stream it for them. So that's a good thing that's come out of it. And that's something we needed very much. The quality of what we made here, technical, was too poor to continue now that we could actually meet. But a lot of things online has actually stopped. From Henrik said so much too, and that's what's happened here as well. We are a little bit more conscious about posting things on our site, Facebook site, and we have gained more followers, so that has meant something. But also we're not a very since we have the population here we have, it's not all that interesting here because many of them can't find their way around Facebook, for example. But at least the streaming is a good thing. It'll mean that we can reach people also in our local nursing home. We haven't been allowed there since the beginning of the middle of March. It's locked down for visitors. So that's a very long time for them without services. Yeah. I think that's it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christine. We have been talking about the digital tools and ways of reaching people online. I think it was good you also pointed to the importance of the physical meeting and the meetings offline, also because we have many elderly people who are not familiar with the social media and online universe. So it's good.
Also, I think it can never replace that. That's what we are locally. We are the community. We meet. That's what we do. Yeah.
There's one question perhaps you have an answer to. Francis Garland from Guildford Diocese, I guess, writes, "We have found provision for children a particular problem. Have you found things that work?"
Provisions like, I think I need a clarification. Provisions.
I'm not sure if it's, is it practical, like taking care of children, or is it more in a church sense? I'm not sure. Maybe some.
I think probably a church sense, yes. How you reach children. Children
is the big challenge, I think, because they can't follow the restrictions. so we had quite a lot of online contact with that group, because we could send little videos with stories and things like that. Now we meet in the church, but they have to sit on chairs because they're from 4 different institutions and they're not allowed to mingle. And that means we can't, for example, we can't eat with them because they won't be able to keep away from each other. So that's really a challenge.
Yes.
And that's why we started all the outdoors activities, because that's a way to still keep in contact with them. It's easier on outside.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you once again, Christine, for sharing your thoughts with us. Time is running, and we'll now move to our last presenter. That is Pastor Andreas from Guildford Diocese. He will also, from a parish perspective, share his reflections on the present situation with the rest of us. Please go ahead, Pastor Andreas.
Thank you, Peter, and hello everybody. Just perhaps picking up on what Pastor Christina said just now, with the provision for children. Up until our second lockdown came into place, we had just started to meet with families in our church center, and we allocated a table for a family. So put all the materials we needed to make various things. We made a bug hotel, and we painted stones for Remembrance Sunday. But it had to be in their contained little bubble. So parents were sitting with masks, and they came in and they sat down. And instead of doing a song or two, we did an action song. So something they couldn't sing along to, but just made actions where they were. So I suppose we find creative ways, but it is a challenge, especially for children. And we used to have a fairly large youth group at the local church, the local school, with about 40 or so teenagers on a Friday night. And that hasn't met since March, since the first lockdown, because the school won't let us in, because it is too difficult for them with all their hygiene and health and safety rules. So for us, I think the most positive experience of this year has been the community engagement, particularly in the first lockdown, where we were quite at the center of the local sort of outreach, helping people to pick up shopping and to pick up prescriptions from the local pharmacy, and that was a wonderful experience, and we got a lot of good feedback from the community. Met people we've never met before, and that was a really positive experience. It's very different now in the second lockdown. I think people are much more used to it, and perhaps they've found family member, friends, neighbors. So we haven't had the same kind of uptake now the second time around. The biggest challenge in the beginning was obviously shock about not being able to be back, to be in church and to worship together. We needed to upskill large parts of the community, including the vicar, with all kinds of electronic means. We have decided from an early point that we were going to go for Zoom as the platform that we engage with, because it provides the two sort of the fact that people at home can participate, and it gives us a feeling of togetherness, and that's what we do at the moment, even with Sunday morning services. Before the second lockdown, we had a congregation meeting in the church, and people from home doing the readings sometimes, all the intercessions. We haven't quite ventured to me doing a sermon from home, so that's always happened from church, but made it very clear that the two parts of the congregation so are together and form one congregation. We found that there's a great willingness to explore fresh expressions of being church together, which probably would not have been possible before the situation was forced upon us. And that was definitely a good thing as well. At the moment, apart from individual prayer in church, everything is in an electronic age. So I spend most hours of the day on the computer with my headphones on, talking to people. We have morning and evening prayer. We started that in March every day. And we have a very faithful little congregation, something that we've always wanted to do and never managed to. And due to Corona, now we pray morning and evening prayer together with a congregation of about 20 people or so, not all there all the time. We've got a once a week coffee and chat where somebody tells us something about their life. We have regular quiz evenings, confirmation class, and also, like Pastor Christina, we've got a telephone buddy scheme going where we allocated people to well, some of the leaders and anybody who wanted to participate, just to follow up on particularly the elderly and the most vulnerable, those that we can't reach electronically, because that's one of the greatest challenges. I've been certainly in the first lockdown at many people's house, outside the house, with them handing the iPad through the window, asking me to download Zoom and set it up for them, and then I sanitize it and pass it back through the window so that they could then participate in what we were doing at the church. So obviously, we've got huge financial challenges with the loss of income from our parish center, our parish hall, which was very important for the financing of our parish and the paying of the parish share. Technical challenges, yes, but we've managed to not overcome them, but we've rose to the challenge. I think the emotional challenge is quite strong, and I've tried to find an analogy to describe what ministry in lockdown feels like. And so I come up with two things, and I don't know whether any of you can relate to that. One is, say the church is built out of different bricks, and the bricks symbolize the different people in our community. And with the lack of fellowship and worship and singing, it feels like building that building, the bricks, without the mortar in between the bricks. So quite a lot of what we do feels a bit wonky. It's the sort of joy and the meaningful worship that glues it all together that is missing at the moment. And so the other analogy is it feels a bit like riding your bicycle with flat tires. You try really hard to pedal, but you can never really gain that much speed as you were hoping to. So I don't know whether others can relate to that as well. What lessons have we learned? Biggest lesson: we can do it. We can rise to the challenge, and that's really positive. There was a question earlier about how can you lead with hope, and I think the Bible is a good place to go back to, especially the desert experiences of you know, the people of Israel in the Old Testament, but Jesus' temptation in the desert, and when he needed to go away from people to recharge his batteries. Knowing that God meets you particularly in those moments when your own capacity has come to a limit, when you've come to the limit of your own capacity. Sort of talking in terms of positive psychology, where people say, well, hope is the product of achieving a goal that you've set yourself to achieve. And that's all very well when it works, but in a situation that is so desperately challenging as ours, I find that that you come very quickly to the limit of that, and relying on God in daily prayer and mutual encouragement is probably for me been the most important thing. And then you do have these little moments of success where you can do a Zoom service and where you have a joyful quiz evening over Zoom together, and that sort of boosts the confidence a little bit. But perhaps the last point I want to make is that I feel that this whole situation has made me realize how insular we often are in our parishes, and how limited resources we often have. With a small congregation, quite elderly, a couple of young families, there isn't a great deal of huge expertise to draw from. And so I think the urgency to engage in greater mutual cooperation across the deanery and with neighboring parishes, for me, I think has become even more urgent now, because I think if 3 or 4 of the key people that help us keep the show on the road at the moment, if they were not there anymore for whatever reason, it would very quickly just go and it would cease to function. So there's a lot of pressure on just a few people to make it work at the moment. That's me.
Thank you very much, Pastor Andreas. And I don't see any questions in the chat, but Paul Davies writes that Pastor Andreas has been impressive with his use of technology. It was amazing to be in church with him and see him uniting people present in person and via Zoom. But I think perhaps I would like to ask you a question. You've been talking about these new and creative and flexible ways of celebrating service and meeting as congregation, both online and offline. Do you see any of these approaches could be taken with you into a new normal, or whatever that will be, if we return to the old normal again? Would you be able to take some of these flexible and creative approaches with you?
We very much hope to do that. We had conversations with our parish council and with our technical people, and some of the people who are at home who are housebound, not necessarily because of Corona or because they're shielding, but simply because they're too frail to come to church. And we, even though we make do with small digital cameras at the moment and haven't really gone through huge expense, but we think that the new normal for us will be to carry on live streaming services from the church to those who are at home. Whether that will be via Zoom or Facebook Live or YouTube, we're not sure, but I think it will be via Zoom, so that the people at home can take an active part in the service. So we have our Zoom host who asks people at home to write prayers of intercessions into the chat, and then when if the person who does the intercessions is at church finishes their intercessions, then the Zoom host says, and the people at home pray for, and then he or she reads all the prayers that the people at home have put into the chat. And that's just a really meaningful way of bringing those two together. Yeah. So we plan to, yeah.
Thank you once again, Pastor Andreas, also for this answer. Time is running up, unfortunately. But before we close the official part of this webinar, Bishop Henrik from Viborg Diocese has promised to round off the meeting and say a few concluding remarks. Bishop Henrik.
Thank you, Peter. And first of all, on behalf of the Diocese in Viborg, I would like to thank all of you from Guildford for this invitation to take part in this webinar. It has been great to be part of it. Thank you. I think from both Andrew and I, we would like to thank Andreas and Christine for what you have given to us, and also you, Peter, for guiding us through this meeting. Everything went well, and I also would like to thank all of you who were active on the chat during the meeting. I think there's a lot of very good things written there, and we can read them afterward. I would certainly do that, and also say that I think it is very important for us right now to keep up this global conversation and dialogue in a time where we are all grounded. I think we need to meet also across borders like this. A few days ago, we had celebrated a prayer service for Christians, persecuted Christians all over the world, and it was a pastor from Iran who gave the sermon. So great to be part and to see that Christianity is, we are actually all over, and we have the fellowship all over the world, and I think it will keep us strength also in this crisis we are facing now. It has been great also to hear about all the new ideas from you from Guildford, and not just ideas, also actually things who are carried out already, and also to share our frustrations in a situation like this. I think that we will have to continue the dialogue, and I think we'll have to continue to learn, and also to evaluate which things we should carry with us also in the future. This learning we have from this crisis. What we have learned is definitely also that there is an expectation also from the society around us that the church should take part of it and should be ready. Also, you mentioned it, Andreas, and I was impressed by the thing that you have been able to do, and also Christine, what you were telling about also moving outside the church and to meet people where we actually can. So I'll just end this few closing remarks by saying, may God bless all of you, and may God give us strength and hope to come further and also to develop our churches to the gain of the people. Thanks a lot.